Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining our webinar. I'm Trevor Graham. I'm the CEO of Ampliphae, and I'm joined today on the line for our webinar by Nigel Oakley, who's our Business Development Director. We're going to spend about the next 30 minutes or so telling you a little bit about Ampliphae and our products. And afterwards, if you've got any questions, feel free to send them through on the webinar, on the chat, or by email afterwards. So at Ampliphae, we're focused on solving problems in the management of cloud applications. As most of you will know, many of these are now delivered as a software as a service model, where the vendor provides the infrastructure as well as the software and operates the application as a service. More and more of the critical applications that organizations depend on are delivered from the cloud in that way, and that brings a whole set of new challenges to the IT organization around visibility of what's going on, business continuity, cost control, and general good governance of the data and the IT applications inside the business. Ampliphae uses deep network analytics to understand what SaaS applications are being used in the organization, and it allows you to make a proper assessment of those applications against your business needs. We also give you the tools you need to apply good governance, bringing SaaS applications under control and allowing innovation in a safe and regulatory compliant way. And it ensures that you can understand and control your spending on SaaS applications. So we've only got 30 minutes. I'm going to hand over to Nigel now, and he'll overview Ampliphae's products in a bit more detail and give you a short demonstration. So Nigel, go ahead.
Thank you, Trevor, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to take you through just a few slides which overview the capabilities of the technology that we are proposing. As Trevor said, this is all about taking control of cloud applications and cloud technologies. This is about software as a service, cloud-based application technologies. Now, interestingly, we've been looking at quite a lot of customers over the last 2 years. And what we found is that in a lot of cases, you will find these organizations, unknown to the IT organization, have something between 100 and 1,500 cloud-based applications in use in one form or another. And these can be as mainstream services such as Dropbox, Sage, Salesforce.com, right through to other applications which focus on technologies like PDF conversion and board minute taking and label printing. So a lot of simple applications which can be signed up by users simply through a web browser with very little friction, cost, or perceived impact on the organization. Now, what we've also found is that something like half of these are becoming mission critical. These applications get embedded into organizations and then start to become main business tools, in a lot of cases out of sight of the IT organization. So where the IT organization thinks it's managing the core applications for an organization, what you often find is there is a bigger sphere of application technologies which are being used by users completely invisibly. And this is growing very quickly. What we found is that something like of the top 100 software vendors are going to go to cloud-only technologies by 2019. And it's growing at something like 30% per annum. Now, what's also interesting is the number of these applications. We've now catalogued in excess of 15,000 individual applications which give users the ability to be able to store data in what could well be an unknown location with unknown governance and unknown security. Now, in the early days of SaaS, it was quite straightforward. Organizations would move to things like Sage or Office 365, and these tended to be point applications of one form or another. What's happened over the last few years is these applications have become more and more encompassing of lots of different technologies and lots of different use cases. So what we're now finding is that they're becoming suites of applications. I'm sure a lot of you will have heard of things like Zendesk, Trello, Slack, Zoho, Salesforce.com. The list is almost endless. And what these often have now are comprehensive APIs which give an individual user the ability to just go to a web browser, sign up for the service, import data into it, and then associate it with lots of other applications by using the APIs. And this then becomes a business suite of applications inside a organization. And this is happening to small companies, this is happening to large companies. Now, the challenge with this is that in a lot of cases, it's completely invisible to the IT organization or management in any way. The SaaS providers have realized that marketing directly to consumers enables them to insert their platforms into organizations and then have them virally adopted. So you then end up with this interesting situation, which is self-selection and consumerization of IT, and also a lot of decentralized decision making. So vendors are defining the architecture and the deployment. Users just require a browser and some connectivity, and then your data is in effect being exported and managed by external vendors. Now, the challenge with this is that the organization, the business, still retain accountability. They retain accountability for security and regulatory infringement, but there are fewer control points, reduced visibility, and often case invisible layers of support. So somebody in the company may have signed up for an application, which then becomes more and more critical to that business. And then the only time that people in authority find out about it is when it stops working. And often in most cases, that is too late at that particular point. Now, this has many different impacts. It has impacts from a business continuity perspective. It has impacts from a financial perspective, because a lot of cases, these will often be expense to these applications, so they will be invisible to the main IT financial flow. And then it will have exposures from a security and compliance perspective. I mean, in this case, we've just highlighted one of them, which is the upcoming regulatory compliance for GDPR, which becomes compliance and law in May of this year. Now, I've just pulled out in this a few fairly simple issues that apply to GDPR. So first one, is the data adequately secured and encrypted in transit and rest? So if we are taking data, and it's as simple as using a web browser, lifting that data and dropping it into a vendor's application somewhere, do we know that it's adequately secured and encrypted? Then the next two questions are very important. Any person will be able to contact an organization and request that any data that they hold is first shown to them and then can be changed on request and can be deleted completely under their control, under your control. So the question is, if your users are randomly storing information around the world in unknown locations, can you actually rectify that and erase it? Also, very interestingly, if the employee who has the logon rights to that service leaves the organization, will you then lose control of that data and the ability to be able to rectify or erase it? Do you know who can access it? Is the information available to anybody in the vendor that wants to log on to one of the control and management screens and view that data? And then the location. So is the data stored in an approved country with adequate security and privacy laws? And finally, can you prove that the SaaS applications in use have appropriate GDPR compliance? We've worked with a number of barristers and a number of legal organizations on the impact of GDPR. And one of the things that they maintain is that at the very basic level, you should know as an organization or a business where your data is stored and who can access it. That is a sort of a really baseline. And from our perspective, we believe that means that you should have really good insight into any SaaS tools which are being used through the organization, how those SaaS tools are being used, and you should have some sort of contractual responsibility with the organization that's supplying that service. Now, I touched earlier on the sort of the viral nature of these technologies, and this is a slide that was put together by our CTO, Tim Croy, to demonstrate how an application goes from discovery, i.e. finding out about it, through to some degree of commitment. And what we've used here is how a mainstream application like Office 365 would go from initial investigation through to commitment. And as you can see, as you go up through the curve, it goes up through a number of boundaries of discovery, criticality, and then the truth is eventually it probably becomes irreversible. Now, the point is here, this goes through a relatively long timeline, and it goes through it under complete control of the organization. Now, contrast this with something like Dropbox. Again, it goes through a similar cycle, but it goes through it very quickly. It goes through the same levels in terms of discovery, criticality, and irreversibility, but then ends up as an unplanned commitment to that technology. So this is what I touched on in the first slide. In a lot of cases, technologies and tools like Dropbox are becoming absolutely irreversible in their use in the organization without some capability of management. Now, if you can manage the adoption and the use of these applications, you can then control them and move them into what may be approved SaaS and cloud tools within the organization. However, if you don't know about them and you don't have a management capability, they will stay as unplanned, in effect, exposures in terms of business continuity, risk, and financial exposure. So if we're going to take control or take back control of this viral SaaS world, the questions are, what do we actually need to know? Now, in talking to a lot of companies, what we've discovered is that the first step in this is discovering how big this problem is. So understanding which cloud applications are being used within the organization. As I said earlier at the start, there are in excess of 15,000 of these applications. So a good starting point is to say, within my company, within my business, within my organization, how many applications and what applications are actually being used. Now, the next question is then to understand what departments, what locations and people are using those applications. And also, how are they being delivered and how are they being used? Because in some cases, somebody may just experiment with a small application, and then it will over time start to trend and become much greater in terms of use. And in understanding these trends is very important and critical in understanding which applications should be approved and which applications shouldn't be approved. And then where and how is that application hosted and delivered? Is it in a GDPR compliant region, or is it in Russia or China or Lithuania or a whole variety of different countries around the world that don't have GDPR approval? Then understand, is it part of a business process? And very importantly, what sort of stance should you take on the application, and what actions should you take in terms of being able to use it and approve it? So in terms of the Ampliphae technology, we have a number of key components to this. First of all is the ability to discover. So identifying all the cloud applications which are in use, understanding who uses them, when, where, and why. Then understanding the governance, understanding how these fit within security, regulatory, and commercial environments, and enabling the ability to make a decision. And then being able to take control. So block or optimize access to individual cloud applications. Interestingly, when we talk to a lot of IT managers, security and compliance people as well, what they said was they didn't want to take a blanket block over the use of cloud applications because they believed they were beneficial and in effect increased the speed and responsiveness of the organization. But what they wanted to be able to do is migrate customers into the correct environment. So they wanted a variety of tools in terms of the ability ultimately to block if necessary, but also at the same time to encourage people to move the data, let's say from Dropbox into something like Azure. And then be able to continually audit and analyze the use of the applications in the organization, and as an ongoing process, enable perhaps new suites and new capabilities as they became available to those companies. So we've developed a technology that allows you to be able to do that. What I'd like to do is just spend a few minutes and just give you a brief introduction into how that environment works. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the Ampliphae system. And what I'm showing on the screen at the moment is the dashboard. So this is in effect the entry point into the Ampliphae system. Now, when we built this capability, one of the things that we were very, very keen on was to making sure that it was very easy to deploy, because we felt that one of the big challenges is just the straightforward discovery. And what we didn't want to build was a capability which relied on log analysis or integrations into firewalls or integration into monitoring systems. We wanted a very simple capability. So the product you're seeing on the screen here has two different ways of being deployed, and they work independently or together. The main direction is by using a small low-cost probe that sits on the main internet connection, and you in effect mirror the traffic into this probe. And what the probe does is collect analytics information and then present that information to you through the use of a dashboard. We also have a web plugin which complements that capability as well, but the probe can be used independently. So as you can see from this screen, what we're showing here is that there is a probe here monitoring one location. We can monitor multiple locations, and there are 320 users using 487 devices. And as you can see from the area that I'm highlighting on the screen, there are 308 individual SaaS or cloud services being used, and 13 of those are approved services and 12 have been blacklisted. Then what we show below are the top services. So you can see the top services which are being used by this company. And then on the dashboard, we categorize this into types of services, and very importantly, where the traffic is going. So you can see for this company that there is a lot of traffic move in North America, in Europe, but also traffic going to China and Russia, and I'll go into that in a little more depth in a moment. So the next screen I'm going to show are then the services which are in use. So down the left-hand side of the screen, we have a list of all the different SaaS services which are being used by the few hundred users there are inside this company. And bear in mind, as I said earlier, it's almost certain that the majority of these will be invisible to IT or compliance or security staff. What we have at the top, different categories along the top, and then we start to drill down in this screen into the different services. So we have security and threat detection, collaboration, file sharing and backup, and then we go through a whole variety of different categories, productivity, email, and so on and so forth. But for this, I'm just going to concentrate on perhaps just a couple of them. If we look at file sharing and backup, which I think is probably used by the majority of the companies, we have a number of different services. We have things like Dropbox, which you would expect probably, iCloud, WeTransfer, Box, and Dolly Drive, and Dolly Drive is predominantly used by Mac users. So I'm just going to pick on one service for a moment, which is just Dropbox. So what we show with Dropbox is that there are 121 users. They're using 3% of this organization's bandwidth for Dropbox, and we take an estimate of the price per user. Now, this, if you don't actually enter the cost that you're paying per user, is then estimated from public available materials. And in this case, Dropbox is costing around about £16 per user if they've signed up for the paid for service. You can see that the use of Dropbox is growing, and we show the number of other services which are in use and the overall volume of them. What we then do is show more information about the service. So from this particular screen, you can see we give basic information on the service, when they were founded, the revenue, then where the data centers are located, whether they're signed for privacy shields, whether the data is encrypted, and whether there is data privacy information. And also you can see from the top here that this is a file sharing and backup service. We've enabled active coaching, which means that if anybody uses this service, in this particular case, they will get an email or a pop-up that says this service is rejected and guide them to the correct service that they should be using. And I say we can graduate this in a whole variety of different levels in terms of responsiveness and blocking of the service itself. And then we show the users. I'm actually just going to go back to the screen before, which takes me into a little more detail on Dropbox. So down the left-hand side here, you can see all the users in this company that are using Dropbox in this particular case, and the destinations for the data. So you can see that in this case, most of the data of Dropbox is going to the US, but then there is also UK traffic, and in this particular case, Netherlands traffic. And we also show the trend. So is traffic rising or traffic shrinking for each of those users? And then the status of that service. So Dropbox is rejected by a particular person, when it was last analyzed, the number of users, and then an overall potential cost envelope for this particular service. So that gives us the whole list of services which are in use within this company. There are a lot more details into this, and we'd be very happy to take you through that, either as a demo or a web demo, whichever will be suitable for you. But I'm just going to quickly look at users. So in this particular case, I'll randomly pick a user, in this case, a person called Abigail Gates. What we then show is, in this screen, all the different services that this user is actually using, the potential cost, the category, but then also where the traffic is in effect going for the services that you're using. So for this particular user, we can see the envelope of locations for the data. And then we start to drill down into in depth in every service and the amount of usage of that service. So we can see the different technologies that they're using, how frequently they're using. We can see if it's upload traffic, if it's download traffic, and the times of day of that particular service. And what we found from customers is that they find this very useful in being able to analyze the patterns and the traffic that individual people are using, and they use it for a whole variety of different services as well. I can just show you one interesting one that we often get asked about, if I can just get down to it quickly, which is, in this case, just YouTube. So you'll see YouTube in this company is being used by 281 people, and it's actually consuming 22% of their wide area network bandwidth. And not unsurprisingly, if we look, the list of users that are using it is tremendously large. And here we've got again the map which shows the different destinations. I'm just going to look at one other one which has been topical in the press just recently, because we look at security and threat detection services as well as just the straight SaaS services. So what we're looking for here is a antivirus. Trend Micro happens to be the main service for this particular company, but they have quite a few users, which in this case are using Kaspersky. And you can see in this particular case that there is a substantial amount of traffic going to a region which is not GDPR compliant, which in this particular case is Russia. So we give really good insight into the use of applications within the company, how they're growing, how they're shrinking. And the most important point is bringing these applications back under governance and back under control by the company's assets. And we can look at financial exposures, we can look at security exposures, and we can look at compliance exposures. So that's the brief intro that I want to go through just now. As I said before, there is a lot more depth to the product and its technology. We can drill down into lots of different detail about the SaaS services that are being used. And one thing I haven't showed, just from a time perspective, is the ability to be able to coach and control. Through email communications, we can coach individuals into the right usage of applications. But through the web plugin, we can go right down to blocking an individual service, and we can block an individual service down to logon credentials as well. So if you're concerned about people using corporate logon credentials for a service like, for instance, a file sharing application, but you're happy for them to use it on their own individual credentials, we can go down to that particular level of granularity. So we come up to the end of the time session here. One of the, if I can actually find a way of doing this, happy to take any questions. I think through the chat window is probably the best way. I'm looking at the chat window now. I actually can't see any questions that have come up right now. Let me just, I'm just going to unmute all the people who are on the call in case anybody, I know, in fact, I can't do that. I thought I would be able to, but I can't. So that's the end of the call as it exists at the moment. Please feel free to contact us if you want more details about the product or technology. We have a lot of information on our website. So thank you very much for attending. I hope that was useful for you. I'm very happy to talk to you in detail about the product or the technology. So please feel free to contact us if you want more details. Thank you very much.